Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. Thank you so much to StartOut for bringing us together for this super important conversations about growth for venture capitalists from underestimated backgrounds. I am Kelley Henry. My pronouns are she, her, and I am on the emerging manager team at SVB. Our team here at Silicon Valley Bank is dedicated support for what we refer to as emerging managers, which we define as folks who are on funds 1, 2, or 3, usually under 150 million. So what some other folks call micro VCs. If you are thinking of starting a fund or interested in connecting, I'd be happy to chat. I'll go ahead and do the thing no one wants to do and tell you all my email address is khenry@svb.com. Feel free to reach out. I'm personally really hopeful and excited about this space. I think the future of the tech ecosystem really is exciting to me because the emerging manager space is so much more diverse and way less homogenous than perhaps traditional VCs have been. So excited to kick off this awesome panel with our amazing panelists to shed some light on the growth roadmap for traditionally underestimated VCs. Please send in your questions during the chat using the chat function on Zoom or the Q&A feature. We'll get to those towards the end of the conversation. And for now, I'm excited to dive in with our amazing panelists today. Welcome, Christine, Vincent, and Monique. I would love to start with introductions. Please tell us your name, your pronouns, where you're located, about your venture fund thesis, and then for fun, a hobby that you do outside of running your fund. And Monique, I'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monique Woodard. My pronouns are she, her. I'm based in San Francisco, and I run a fund called Cake Ventures, as you might see. I invest in seed and pre-seed companies focused on areas of demographic change that are changing the way that we should invest in technology. Some of those include aging, the increased spending power of women, the rise of a new majority where people of color become the majority in the US, things like that. A hobby that I do when I'm not investing, I do a lot of vintage shopping. Is that a hobby? Maybe.
Valid.
I buy things.
Vincent, kick us off next with your name, location, pronouns, fund thesis.
Sure. So I'm Vincent Diallo. Let's put it straightforward. I'm French. You're gonna hear that in my accent throughout my talk. Pronouns is he and him. I run a fund called Untitled Venture with my partner Joseph. I'm based in San Francisco, but I'm coming today from New York. We invest in pre-seed and seed in retail technology and commerce technology. A hobby I do when I'm not investing. I'm pretty big generally in meditation. I'm a Vipassana practitioner, but I would highlight I just finished a triathlon, and that was a big challenge for me. Pretty proud of it.
Nice. And Christine, we'll kick it over to you.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here alongside my illustrious panelists. I'm Christine Tsai, CEO and founding partner at 500 Global. Pronouns are she, her. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and hobby, I guess it still counts as a hobby, even though I'm really out of shape and I can't remember the last time I've been to class, but dance, primarily ballet and aspiring hip hop. And a little bit about 500 Global. We are previously known as 500 Startups. We invest in all kinds of geographies, primarily early stage. We recently are expanding our scope all the way from first check to last check. We've invested in 2,500 companies around the world, 77 countries, and we turned 11 years old this year.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And I'll just say, I think dance counts as a hobby forever. That's one of those things that the muscle memory kicks back in, and you're right where you started. So let's dive in a little more to how your vision for 500 Global has evolved over the past 11 years.
Mm-hmm. So since the very beginning, we, a lot of the investment thesis conviction was revolving around a couple things. One was sort of this concept of diversifying and de-risking early stage venture. We weren't the first to do a lot of small checks and double down, but we were probably one of the first that did it at that volume. So we felt that was a much less risky way to go about early stage venture, given when you're a startup, with just a few co-founders, small team, maybe some product, it's very difficult to have, really difficult to know that company is going to become a winner down the line and be this big outcome. So by making a lot of small bets across a lot of sectors, geographies, and of course, including those who are going after underserved markets or overlooked by traditional venture, we felt that building that type of expansive portfolio was key. And the other part in terms of that conviction was really believing that the next big companies, next great founders would come from, all corners of the world, all geographies, certainly all genders, races, nationalities, languages. And so that conviction was quite high from the beginning, in a time when it was not really a thing to invest beyond a 50-mile radius, Sand Hill Road, Silicon Valley. So as early as 2010, 2011, we were already investing outside of the US. And now, 11 years later, the world's a very different place. And I'm pretty sure, a lot of many investors, invest cross border.
It does seem there's a trend towards this sort of globalization, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But Vincent, I'd love to kick it over to you. I know you announced your close of Fund 1 fairly recently, right?
Totally right. That was in May, a great moment after a couple of, I would say, dozens of months of hustle.
Congratulations, that's amazing. I'd love to hear about how your post-closing Fund 1, like what are your sort of learnings from that, and how does that inform your path forward? And then I'd love to know how you're thinking about Fund 2.
Well, closing Fund 1, I think, there was a significant milestone, because we're definitely outsider again. My partner is French too, so we arrived in the US. We're coming from China, so maybe the reverse journey than Christine, where we were a little bit more global and now we're getting more local. But now we came with a strong thesis around our past experience, because we're from operator in retail, and we managed to convince I would say families in retail to join us, and our first anchor is probably among the biggest family in retail in Europe. We, after this first closing, we managed to convince more American investors, put it this way, and getting more and more local, and we had the chance to have PayPal joining the last close, which was definitely a game changer and anchoring our I would say attached to the US market. Quite a hustle. Lots of ups and downs, of course. And we're having 17 companies. It's a $14 million fund, 1-4. So we're deploying. We want to go up to 25, 30 companies. And we will start thinking about Fund 2 probably within next year. Let's first deploy and make sure we have some good wins on our space. It's quite moving things too. With the pandemic, put it this way, a couple of movements.
Wonderful. And then Monique, your tagline is so clever, and I'm sure resonates with a ton of folks. It is investing in where we're going, not where we came from. Talk to us about how you define this and how you communicate this and think about it.
Yeah, so investing in where we're going, not where we came from, really points to the demographic changes that we're seeing. So for instance, there are 10,000 people turning 65 every single day. There's this massive market being created around aging. And previously, I think that a lot of investors discounted, the let's call it the 55 and over market as not particularly technical and unable to be reached in traditional ways like Facebook marketing or Instagram marketing or whatever. And, some of the things that we're seeing is that one, this is a growing population. Two, they're much more technical than I think a lot of VCs anticipated. And they are very reachable, not necessarily through, the Instagram channels, but through many different channels that you can open up. And so that's a really good example of investing in where we're going, not where we came from, taking our old assumptions about a market and really kind of throwing them away. Another layer of the cake is the rise of a new majority where people of color become the majority in the United States and are already a global majority. And that's really about, uncentering the white male user, as like the centerpiece of who is a user of a product, and really understanding that your users are many more people of color, many more women, many more people outside of the coastal cities, and building products toward the biggest swath of users.
Monique, you have a background as an investor and venture partner for other funds. Tell us, how has your perspective and sort of like trajectory and journey as a VC changed since launching your own fund?
Yeah, I mean, other funds like 500 Global, which is where I started my career in investing alongside Christine. And so, working at a fund and investing at a fund is very different from running a fund. There's a lot of operational lift that you don't have to necessarily do when you're just investing out of a fund, right? And so, I definitely find myself on the phone with lawyers and accountants a lot more than I would like to be. And you have to be in for that kind of experience and want to believe that you're building a firm, not just a fund, right? And I think, I probably could have gone and gotten, a job as a investing partner at some firm, but I come from an entrepreneurial background. And so, when I was thinking about what my next step was in venture, it was pretty obvious that I was going to raise a fund, and it was just a matter of figuring out, what the thesis was and how to do it, and how to take that step. And so I think when you're an entrepreneur and you decide to move on to the venture side of the table, it's almost natural to then become an entrepreneur in venture, which means starting your own fund. We just can't stop.
Very different perspectives on each side of the table, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's a great segue. I'd love to hear from each of you about, I think each of you started your funds at like a very different sort of like point in the market, if you will. So would love to hear about each of your journeys to launching the fund, what initially made you want to launch it, and what was the most unexpected learning that you had throughout your launch? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in, kick us off.
I'll hop in since I'm off mute. So I think I was looking over my track record. I was an investor at 500 startups. I was a scout at Lightspeed. I did a handful of angel investments, and I was sort of trying to figure out what these investments were telling me, right? Your investments are really your thesis. And so it was really looking at those investments and figuring out that what I invest in is demographic change, and then building the thesis around wanting to do more of that and wanting to scale that kind of investment, and understanding that the world which was shifting and changing in a way that I think a lot of VCs weren't really paying attention to, and that there was this opportunity to create a brand and create a wedge in the market and really create, a a long-lasting firm, and that kind of thesis wouldn't really lend itself to being shoehorned into an existing fund, but really needed its own platform in order to grow. And so the biggest thing that I learned in raising Cake Ventures, was that the question? I mean, I think initially when a fund manager goes out to raise a fund, they sort of want to talk to all of the people, right? You want to talk to individuals, and you talk to family offices, and you talk to some fund of funds, and you might talk to some endowments, or you might talk to some corporates. And it was only as I gained momentum that I really honed in on who my LP is, right? And who my investor is. And then I was able to cut out a lot of like the conversations that I knew were not going to go anywhere, because those people were not my LPs. And, my LPs are emerging manager fund of funds. And so I spend most of my time talking to emerging manager fund of funds. And I do lay the groundwork for future funds when I'm not an emerging manager by talking to endowments. But I'll be very candid, like corporates are not, they are not into what I do. Anyone who made a diversity pact or pledge is not into what I do. Yeah, we could talk about that. But it's really important to like hone in on who your LP is, and then just go straight down that road and, forget everything else.
Yeah, I think honing in on that is a huge win and a huge, hurdle. So that's great, to cut out some of the noise, if you will. Yeah. Vincent, tell us about what made you want to launch, and what was your unexpected learning?
Well, for me, the whole journey has been quite organic. I never planned to become a VC before. I just been called by a rich entrepreneur to be my former boss in China, where we exited a $200 million business where I was the CFO. He became super rich when they called me, hey, do you want to invest for me in tech? I'm like, yeah, what is it? Okay, let's do it. A little bit like adventurous and opportunistic, of course. And in terms of thesis, I realized very quickly that all the investment I was comfortable with were in line with the industry I know the best, which is retail. So all this very organic. I went on the road trying to raise from corporates. Pretty hard. I think it's changing, but I have this big learning also like similar as Monique is. You really have to understand the different categories of LPs and understand the one that resonates with you. In our case, that was more individual and families, because there's a patrimonial, I would say, a dimension that does not exist in other categories of LPs. Having said that, we were super lucky to benefit from, let's say, this opportunity fund and this opportunity program. So some actually put the money where their mouth is. Another big learning is also to take the no. I used to be take so many no's and keep in shape. I used to be an Excel guy, and I was not used to to face so many no's. And so I think it's let's say an emotional intelligence exercise that was quite interesting and definitely boost my personal development. So,
Raising a fund is not for the faint of heart. And Christine, tell us about launching 500 Global and what your learnings have been since then.
Yeah, definitely a lot of learnings. I think, when we raised our first fund, it was definitely a different time in the market, different cycle. So this is around 2010. And there were a handful, a good number of seed funds and micro VCs, but it was still pretty small, especially compared to today, let alone a fund that was trying to also do an accelerator as part of their investment thesis and invest outside of Silicon Valley, outside of the US. So definitely quite contrarian at the time. In terms of the other thing that was, I think, at the time quite unusual. Nowadays it's almost table stakes, but we were largely operators trying to be VCs, and that was something we really leaned on as a strength, in terms of our founders, that we've actually, operated, we've founded companies, we built the platforms that many startups use for distribution. No one came from a professional VC background or finance or Sand Hill Road. So that was pretty unusual at the time. Nowadays, like if you don't have that operating background, then founders find you suspicious, maybe. But so that was definitely something unusual at the time. In the learnings over the past 10 years, both with kind of the flagship funds as well as a lot of our regional funds, I would echo probably what my fellow panelists will say, that it's very excruciatingly hard. There's no other humbling experience than raising money, whether it's raising money for a startup or raising money for a fund. I know Monique has an amazing analogy for this that she likes to use. That's specifically for Black female fund managers. That's this just gives you a sense of just how hard it is. How there's so much about just how the system operates that really works against fund managers that either just look different or don't come from those backgrounds or are just doing something different. A lot of the LPs that you talk with, especially as you get more and more institutional, they don't have that much incentive to take risks, honestly. They tend to back the same managers for 20 years, 30 years, same vintages, because there's just not much upside in going after something new. Hence, when you think about what you're building as a fund manager and you're running a fund, your thesis, who you go after, who your LP, what kind of LPs would resonate with what you're doing makes a huge difference. So basically know your customer. And that was definitely the case. So for us early on, as an example, US institutional investors, we didn't get great reactions there because they didn't do a lot of early stage, let alone the high volume investing outside of the US. All of that was just too much for them. They wanted traditional, concentrated venture capital investing in US, didn't want international exposure. Now, again, a lot of these endowments and pension funds or institutions are starting to be more open to international, a little bit more open to early stage, just given how much activity there's been in early stage venture. But even then, it's still, you hear stories of they'll want to get to know you for several years before they make an investment. That pretty much is the case. So definitely understanding your customer. And I think the last thing that comes to mind is that it really is a little bit more tactical, but it is like a sales process. So anything you can do in terms of tracking your conversations and really trying to get as analytical as possible about your fundraising process, it'll help you spot maybe where you're wasting time or where in the funnel LPs are dropping off. I'm sure my panelists have a lot of different tools that each of us use, but it's really not unlike running a sales process.
I think that's great feedback. It's interesting that there's this much of a sort of hurdle, or that it's that much of an uphill battle when we often see EMs leading to better returns, emerging managers leading to better returns. So the gap, I hear you, is still there. I want to double click into a theme here. One of the folks in the audience wrote in a question to talk more about the process of pitching to institutional funds versus family offices. So would love to hear your experiences and advice that any of you have.
Well, I can share a little bit my experience on that. Basically, as an emerging manager, the moment you enter the room of a fund of fund, I don't have experience with emerging manager fund of fund, but fund of fund in general. I remember my first pitch. It started by so the main investor saying, "Very nice to meet you guys. We're not going to invest in you, but very nice to meet you." So that was basically the introduction, and that's exactly the expectation to have. I think for most of the fund of fund, you're just taking a date, and indeed they follow you. The difference with I would say family office that are managed by family members, and I insist on this. There's definitely I would say an emotional connection that counts a lot in the decision-making process. they are the one who, same as individual investor, who can take a really big risk on a newcomer, because let's be honest, it's a huge risk, and without let's say fearing the consequence of their decision. So that make a big difference. So I would say it's important to be able to establish this emotional connection, and so yeah, you have to know your customer. You don't have to know the person, what they like, and in an authentic way, try to resonate with let's say different topics out of investment, of course, to create a real LP experience or real investor experience. I would say, and it's fundamental because most of them are also in for the experience, not just for the return.
I saw a lot of head nodding from Monique and Christine as you were saying that. Monique, Christine, anything to add about pitching institutionals versus family offices?
I think Vincent covered pretty much a lot of the key points. I mean, with institutions, or maybe I'll start with family offices. One, there's just so many family offices out there, and it's one of the more challenging profiles to go after because one, there are so many. It's a very fragmented space, big range in sizes, kind of the smaller single family offices all the way to multifamily offices, some that are, hundreds of billions of dollars, but they're still a family office. They almost maybe operate more like an institution. But in many cases, common characteristics are they can be very hard to find. A lot of them don't want to be found. That personal connection is important because oftentimes the decision-making process may be a lot faster than an institution. It's really just the principles, thumbs up or thumbs down. But as a result, sometimes what they're looking for, their mandates can change depending on really just what the principals are looking for. But they can be quicker, usually quicker on decisions depending on the size. Institutions, I think, kind of what I said to before. There's probably a lot of they want to get to know you. It may be a lot of no's before you get to a yes, or you're able to turn that into a yes, but in the meantime, it may be many years before they even consider wanting to invest in you. So, but this can also, there's some nuances to the US institutions versus institutions outside of the US. Some move faster than others, but all in all, it is, I would not expect if you meet them now and you're raising for your fund, expectation usually, unless you hear otherwise or otherwise, is this is more of a fund 2 conversation or fund 3 conversation. But definitely depends on the institution.
So a common theme that I'm hearing is around how you're positioning yourself and knowing your customer, whoever you're pitching as an LP. Another question from an audience member: if you have a lack of traction, or if you're a new fund manager, how do you best position yourself when you can't prove your track record yet, but you have access to good deal flow and personal networks?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, right? Because LPs all want to see a track record. And so I think creating a track record in any way that you can, whether it's, being able to deploy small, and I mean, very small angel checks into companies and, demonstrate that you have access and that you can get allocation with founders is one way to think about creating a track record. Becoming a scout at, a venture firm is another way. I think, being able, any way that you can find to prove your ability to select companies and add value, plus your ability to continue to get allocation from founders as their rounds become more competitive, is the way to show LPs that, you have something that could become, that you could stand up a venture fund. And it's hard. It's very chicken and egg, right? Because you need the capital to be able to deploy and get a deeper track record, but you need a track record before someone will give you money to deploy. And so it becomes this total chicken and egg sort of thing. But I think the advent of things like, rolling funds and crowdfunding and scout programs is hopeful in democratizing some of that.
Anyone else want to jump in on this topic?
I may add the importance of finding a differentiation angle. I would say when we started fundraising, we were clear that there was absolutely no need of a new micro VC in Silicon Valley or in Silicon Alley, and clearly we had to find a specific angle and definitely play on our strengths, and hence the choice to focus on one industry which was not that sexy at that time. So much less capital deployed in retail tech in 2015-16, I would say. And well, another element is also be bold, be contrarian, come with new ideas. And I mean, any element of originality, because many investors are also looking for a certain differentiation, or a certain diversification, in their portfolio. And so if you come to pitch a fund where they already have a position, potentially they will end up with a no, because they're already exposed to the same deals. So if you come with something else, with a totally new tech, I think, and new eyes, I think you have more chance. On this side, we were kind of lucky because, again, we were so different. I would say it's from many ago that at least people definitely remember us. When we generally start, we say, "Oh, we French, we invest in the US, but we come from China and we have the eyes that are open." This, so that was fun at that moment. And we didn't have much track record, despite the fact that we had the chance to invest one family office before. I think differentiation is also really, really fundamental.
Differentiation is key, and I love your advice to be contrarian. That resonates. I'm going to change gears a little bit. Christine, you mentioned this a moment ago, but you started 500 Global before this recent uptick in micro or emerging manager funds. I mean, I think at SVB 2 years ago, we were tracking less than half as many micro VCs as we are now. So really just a huge, huge growth of the ecosystem. You also started 500 Global before we had this level of conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the importance of prioritizing this in our ecosystem and community overall. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are the challenges the same now? How have they evolved over the years? Are we getting better?
I think that I've been investing for like now more than 10 years, but these past 10 years have been quite a whirlwind, just in terms of like how quickly things have developed in terms of just the sheer amount of funding that's gone into venture at global scale. The term unicorn was coined in 2013 or 2012, and there weren't that many at the time. And now there's like every day there's a unicorn's not that special anymore. Now maybe you're a decacorn, that's kind of special, but so there's just there's a lot more money coming into the private markets, into tech. You start to see funds that are kind of crossover funds coming into the private space, and there's an IPO like every week in the portfolio. So it's just a very active time. Valuations across the board are increasing, but I think the one thing that gets forgotten there is that as much as there's a lot of funding coming into the market, important question is like, what amount of funding, or what are the results and the big outcomes? Like, how many of them are those underrepresented founders? And I think I saw, I don't remember where this was, some maybe it was VC Twitter, I'm not sure, but there's also a lot of larger, more established funds launching dedicated seed vehicles, which is a nice validation of the seed stage. And I definitely recognize that there was some commentary that that's just going to go to the same founders who could raise it from anywhere, right? So like how much of that is going into really talented Black founders or LGBTQ founders that, just like, it's great that, Greylock or whoever else raised a huge fund, but, where's like, are they investing into more more founders that are diverse, going after amazing businesses? Probably not. Like, it's probably not moving the needle very much. So, I think now today, what I see is it's much more of a top of mind. And I think the mantra or the mentality of VCs and founders subscribing to a win at all costs mantra is has gotten some companies to be very big outcomes, but it discounts a lot of factors that are important. And now it's much more costly to make these changes, to operate better, to retain talent. This is everything from diversity across the executive team, the board, data security, privacy compliance. We've seen all kinds of ugly incidents with companies and data breaches and whatnot. And so, ESG, or like looking at environmental, social governance issues, that's, I feel, becoming increasingly more important. It's slightly separate, but in line with diversity, equity, and inclusion, just when it comes to operating your company, building your company, as well as how you invest. I think the younger generation is a lot more conscious about these things, hopefully. So not just from our tech bubble, but even from just being a consumer. So there's a lot more demand to see companies and investors go about things in a much more responsible fashion. But in terms of your question, has it gotten better? In some ways, it has, just more in terms of it being a lot more of a priority. But at the same time, it's not going to change overnight. And I think it's, I think all of us on this panel are doing what we do because we love it. And we do really have that conviction and belief in, the next great businesses are going to be founders that don't look like the typical founder. And we hopefully are part of that change, but I think it's not all on us, of course. It's not all on the diverse fund GPs and managers. It's got to be an industry-wide change, and you extrapolate that further into the broader system that we're in. So it's probably a longer topic, but I think all of us are hoping that by doing what we do, we are part of that change.
A related question came up in the chat from an attendee. How do you each source diverse entrepreneurs for your funds to invest in?
Well, on our end, we clearly voice out our interest for underrepresented founders. The reality is that we believe that underrepresented founders are potentially disclosing more grit. I mean, just because they are where they are in front of a VC, pitching a VC coming from further, that's for us demonstration of grit, which is probably one of the most important, I would say, criteria to evaluate the founder. Are they really going to do what they're saying, what they envision? And from this perspective, we voice out the fact that investing in underrepresented founders is simply good business. To be demonstrated in our case, but we strongly believe that it's a clear additional energy and I would say drive to deliver. Voice out. That's one dimension. The other one is also to partner with organization. I'm happy to bring a little bit of support to Black VC, but also StartOut to take position of mentors. Helping founders to deliver their message or nail their fundraising. And on this part, I want to shout out to Vicky from Dapper Boy that is doing an incredible job, an amazing brand that I love, and that was an amazing moment with her. Thanks to StartOut. That was an incredible mentorship experience. So I think, put energy and resource in these organizations. That helps.
Okay, I think I have 5 minutes left. I was just given the warning. So I want to do a rapid fire of 3 last points from each of you. 1, how do you prioritize your personal health and wellness while you are building and raising and deploying a fund? What are you most excited about in the future? And do you have a call to action for the audience? How can we connect with you, support you? Monique, let's start with you.
So how do I prioritize health and wellness? I'm big on like acupuncture and massages and facials and lots of self-care, and just taking the time to do that, and prioritize it in my schedule. And then what am I most excited for in the future? Was that the second question? The thing I'm most excited for in the future is really seeing a lot of these funds that have micro funds that have come about that invest in diverse entrepreneurs or underrepresented entrepreneurs, really seeing those efforts scale and show that there is alpha to be found there, and seeing like one of those companies that was invested in by a micro fund like that turn into a public company, because I think it's only a matter of time before that happens. And then you all can reach me at Monique Woodard on Twitter. I'm very tweetable. There are a lot, like most VCs. And how can you support me? I invested in a company called Seraph. It's at seraph.space, and it's an LGBTQ plus social network and community. I encourage you all to go and sign up for the waitlist, because it is going to be the biggest verticalized social network. So that's how you can support me, by supporting my founders.
Amazing. Amazing. Vincent, how do you prioritize wellness? What are you most excited about? What's your call to action or a way we can connect and support you?
Same as Monique, I really covered some time, especially to take care of myself. And as I said before, for me, it's about meditation and endurance sport. This is quite recent. Triathlon, yes, good. What I'm most excited about, well, is seeing some of the founders that really moved me by their stories, by their the energy they put in the project. I want to see them becoming successful. I'm not talking only about the portfolio companies. I'm talking about all the companies that I've been interacting with in quality of I don't know, advisor / mentor, and where I see real work. And again, kudos to Vicky for what she does. Yeah, this what for me it's really let's say stories of human beings that really wants to elevate themselves and realize their true nature. So seeing them successful, that's really excites me a lot every day. How to reach me? Definitely not on Twitter. I don't manage that. I don't know how it works. So I'm old school on that. Go on email. I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and feel free to reach out there.
Amazing. Christine, last but not least, take us home. Prioritize wellness, exciting, call to action.
Well, if the next step for me is to have this time spent on a hobby for myself. But in the meantime, one thing that I do that actually is somewhat a prioritization of, I guess, wellness is I'm really diligent about my kids playing piano. So you can, you can't see it behind me. It's with the Zoom background, but both kids play piano. Thankfully, I played piano growing up, which they sort of don't like, because I'm on them every day to practice, and I sit with them and I like practice with them. I tell them they should be grateful that their mom can help them with piano, but it's actually, they're getting to the point where they actually, I think, don't protest practice as much. So I think me doing that just helps me spend time with them, and it's something that we can hopefully share in terms of hobbies. So and then in terms of what I'm most excited about, because 500 has such a global footprint, it is something that we were early to, and we definitely have that position in the market and in our brand as a VC. But the world is a big place, and there's a lot of the world we haven't covered yet. And there's what we call internally a lot of this rise of the next. So we believe that a big part of being global is being hyper local in these markets. We'll continue to go deeper into markets like Southeast Asia, Latin America, Middle East, East Asia, et cetera. But there's also a lot of these emerging frontier markets like, say, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Central Asia, Africa. There's just the next unicorn will easily come from any of these markets and is probably already brewing. So that's what I'm excited about in terms of like what's next to invest in. Call to action. I think for 500, we love seeing great founders through our accelerator. Me personally, Twitter, I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter, so not like messages there are so-so, but LinkedIn, I try to be responsive on LinkedIn. It's a bit challenging, but I do look at LinkedIn a lot more than I used to, so that's probably a good way to reach me.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Monique, Christine, and Vincent for your time this afternoon. I know we all took tons of learning, so appreciate it. Thanks to StartOut for hosting us, and thank you all for joining and sending in questions. Again, I'm Kelley Henry, and thanks. Have a wonderful rest of the summit.